foHRward tackles burning questions and hot topics in Canadian employment law, human resources, and dispute resolution. Hosted by Rudner Law, foHRward is your go-to source for legal insight on the world of work. So whether you are an employee or an employer, a lawyer or an HR pro, let's ignite the conversation and get into today's episode. Here's your host, employment lawyer, mediator, and founder of Rudner Law, Stuart Rudner.
Hey, welcome to episode 85 of foHRward. We have dispensed with the season, so now we're just counting the episodes in order. The other big change, as you may have noticed, is that we're not streaming this live anymore. We're going to be recording the episodes, but hoping to follow roughly the same schedule, which is to release a new episode every third Tuesday of the month. Hopefully that will make it easier to line up two guests for every episode, which makes it even more enjoyable for me and hopefully for you guys as well. So I'm very excited about today's episode. I am joined by two people who I admire and respect quite a lot. First guest is Sandra Bekhor, whose podcast I was on just recently and had a really good time. So I thought I'd return the favor and ask Sandra to join me. Sandra is a practice management coach at Bekhor Management, and her program Mindset Mastery is the inspiration for today's episode. Our second guest is Edgar, who is the Chief People Officer at Wajax and also the co-founder of foHRward. And foHRward is foHRward, which is a community for HR leaders. Mark is also a regular participant in my Advanced HR Law for HR Professionals course that I offer every year. And he is usually on the fireside chat that we do for senior HR professionals and always provides some sage guidance and words of wisdom. So looking forward to this. Thank you both for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Stuart. Great to be here.
I think it's going to be a great discussion. So let's get right into it. Sandra, Mindset Mastery is a course or a program that you offer. What is it and who is it for?
So let's start with what mindset is. Mindset is about how you have set your mind. So either it's flexible or it's fixed. You know, you walk into circumstances and people, and you've always got this preconceived notion of how things will be. And you're already pissed off before you even get there. So Mindset Mastery is about mastering the mindset so that instead of the mind controlling you, you control it. And so it's a program, basically group coaching along with some curriculum to learn on your own and things to practice.
Well, and who is it good for?
So as a coach, I work with professional services firms, lawyers, architects, accountants, consultants, any kind of service.
So are lawyers the ones who are always coming on already pissed off?
They do.
I won't probe further since your husband is a lawyer, so we can stop that conversation there. But this sounds so obvious when you said mindset is when you have you've already set your mind. I never kind of thought about it that way, but it's a great and sort of really intuitive point. So one of the things that I thought was kind of cool, because obviously we've talked a lot, I've checked out, the program on your website, and I've read about the 9 saboteurs that we're going to go through. I was at a conference 2-3 days ago now, and I met a gentleman who clearly was either he'd taken a course like this, or I'm not sure if he was teaching it, but he was truly shocked when I managed to tell him several of the different types of saboteurs before he got to explain it to me. So if nothing else, you've allowed me to impress people through our relationship.
That's hilarious. Well, you impressed me. Like you really did your homework for this podcast. So that's great. It's going to help us have a better discussion.
I think that's great. I'm just trying not to embarrass myself. So that's why I try to prepare ahead of time. So I know there are the 9 saboteurs. Why don't you take us through that quickly and then we can dig into some of them.
Okay, so saboteurs, just for everyone to understand, this is the result of the research at Positive Intelligence, which is where I was trained as a coach. And basically saboteurs are the typical ways that we self-sabotage. Everybody does it. This isn't, oh, I know the guy that does that. No, we all do it, okay? We just do it in different ways and different things trigger us. So this research basically simplifies it so that we understand 9 basic personality types. And at the root of each of these saboteurs is actually a strength. So we talk about them in terms of, self-sabotage, but when we're feeling calm and at ease, that very same characteristic will show up as a strength. Okay, so there's the people pleaser, hyper rational, the hyperachiever, the avoider, the stickler, the controller, hypervigilant, victim, and I knew I was going to forget one.
The forgetful person?
Another hyper. I don't know. I forgot the ninth.
Hyper-rational? Is it hyper-rational, Sandra?
Hyper-rational is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Oh.
The pleaser. Did I say the pleaser?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to go out on a limb, and I could be wrong. Is pleaser sort of the most common one?
I haven't read research about them being more common than another, but I will tell you, I do see a lot of the pleaser in my practice. And, there are a few that show up more typically in certain professions. Just I've noticed it. It's not based on research.
Fair enough. I mean, I think it would certainly apply to me, and I think to a lot of the people I know. So I can see that. And also, when I get my chance to do my rant at the end of this episode, part of my comments relate to that. So I was curious, and I guess I'll ask you, Sandra, and then maybe Mark, if you want to jump in as well. I guess, how do you see this impacting the workplace specifically, whether it's pleaser or other types of saboteur?
We take ourselves wherever we go. So if you have something that stresses you out, that a typical kind of situation that will stress you out, it's not going to just stress you out at home. It will stress you out in the workplace too. And it will affect your relationships and your performance and your wellness, frankly. So, okay, let's start with the pleaser. I mean, the pleaser is very relatable. These 9 saboteurs, many of them are intuitive. So you understand from the label what it means. So people pleaser is somebody that has this need to please others because that's how they feel safe. If I try and please somebody and, I think, oh, that's how they're going to like me, I'm going to flatter them, or I'm going to try and help them, give them some advice or save them, or, and do something like that, then they will like me. And if they like me, I'll feel safe. So that's the tendency of the pleaser. When the pleaser is feeling safe and happy and calm, they're actually, the strength underneath that is they're very empathetic and they're good at building relationships. So they're great connectors. So you can see either the strength or the stress points in the workplace. So somebody who's feeling calm and at ease, they will bring those people-pleasing tendencies to their work in a very positive way. They will build a great professional network and they will have deep relationships with those people. Their clients will feel heard. They will feel like they really connect. Their team will feel like they're appreciated. But when that same person with the people pleaser tendency is at stress or feeling that they're approaching burnout or they're angry about something, they won't talk about it, then it's going to flip and they're going to see the other side of the pleaser. And they're going to be, oh, okay, so this is the person who's now promising things to the client that they really shouldn't be. And the client's calling all around, where's that thing? And now the boss is angry because what did you promise this client? And you did something wrong, but you can't stop yourself and keep doing it. A new client shows up and you do it again.
I've sort of seen the opposite. I've seen this with a service provider that I've dealt with where the boss is the pleaser. And I've seen the boss make just outlandish promises. But then, of course, he just passes it on to his staff and says, okay, make it happen. And they've got to try to figure out a way to make it happen or explain to the client why it can't happen. But that's dangerous as well.
Yeah. I mean, it hurts profitability and it creates stress points for everybody.
So, Mark, you've been second. It looks like you're avidly taking notes. I mean, does this, for someone who's been in the workplace and in HR for a fair amount of time, does this resonate with you?
Oh yeah, of course. No, I think Sandra's made some excellent points, and I can relate to it a lot, both from an individual level for myself, but also as I think about it for the teams I've been part of or the organisations I've been supporting from an HR perspective over the years. So I think it's very important to understand these concepts, and it feels like there is a level of your kind of awareness we need to build with people so that they can then think about the impact that perhaps some of these mindsets will have on themselves, as you pointed out so nicely, Sandra, but also for others as well, the people they're working with. So yeah, lots to relate to for sure.
So, and yeah, I think you said that really well, both of you, that this has consequences. So I guess, I mean, obviously, Sandra, you're doing coaching, you're helping people with this, but how does someone improve if they identify with any of the different types of saboteur?
Okay, so let's play with the pleaser a little bit since we're there already. So let's say, you've had this lifetime of helping people and doing things that basically you're challenging your own boundaries with life because you really you can't control this feeling of wanting to please people. And then you take a program like this and start to understand that that's what's happening with you. Okay, so now you can have some objectivity about your own behavior. So next time you go into this new meeting with this new client, you set an intention. So rather than going in the way you always did in the past with like, I really hope they like me. I really, really hope they like me. What can I do to make them like me? And I'm exaggerating it for drama here. And I am a pleaser, so no offense to the pleasers listening to this. Recovered pleaser.
Oh,
And
it's recovered. So yeah, that's what
recovered.
we have to get the rest of us to.
Exactly. And so the difference is that once you have that awareness, that you have that tendency, and basically to soothe the feelings about it is remember there's always a strength underneath it. It's not that you're going to suffer with this for the rest of your life. Remember that there's a strength underneath it. But think about, anticipate what you have on your schedule. So if you have that meeting with the new client today, set an intention. What are you going to have in place as boundaries? So what are the, appropriate things to promise? What are the things that are, that you have promised in the past that were inappropriate, where you created some stress points for the company or got into trouble or lowered profits or whatever it was? And are you able to articulate some kind of policies, or this is how we work, or bring in a second person, or have sort of a practice with your manager or with someone else who has comfort around explaining these boundaries so that you get comfortable before you go into the meeting, and to take some time to calm down before, not after, not during, then it's too late. Go for a walk, take a few breaths, have a few minutes of meditation or stretch. Whatever it is that helps you to feel centered, do that before you go into the meeting.
Sandra, it sounds very much like it's a kind of habit in some ways, I guess, that you're trying to help people to build the awareness and think about how they break that. So I like the way you're framing it in terms of being able to think about your intent before you go into a situation. But I really like your idea around, potentially having somebody with you. So some way of just changing the environment. Is that the idea there, to kind of think about these things differently, perhaps?
It's almost like balancing energies, because sometimes when you're facing this, okay, now I have this new realization that I have these people pleasing tendencies. Now you have a learning curve. How do I shift that? And you're not going to shift it overnight just because you have the realization. It is a habit that you have to learn, a new habit of interrupting that knee-jerk reflex of like, oh no, somebody's made that, that pouty face, I'm in trouble. Oh no, I have that new client and I don't know how to make them like me if I don't do the things that I used to do. But you do know that other people don't have that same tendency. And if you observe, or you let them take some of the space, some of the oxygen in the room, it will change the energy and the dynamic, and it will make it feel less pressure for you, and you will learn by mimicking.
Makes sense.
So, okay, when you're talking about bringing a second person with you, I'm sort of picturing a good cop, bad cop type of scenario, but that's not really what you're talking about, is
It's
it?
not. It's not what I'm talking about. And that was just one idea. Really, the idea behind this whole program is for people to tap into their own intelligence. It's not that there's one way to handle the situation. The idea is for you to find the way that works for you.
I'm trying to think about the ways in which I've seen, either as, again, myself or other people work through these things. And I think it sounds like, Sandra, you're trying to, again, bring awareness to people. So I always think that there's a difference between people's intent and often their impact. So I may intend to be a pleaser, which to your point isn't a bad thing. You're being empathetic, you're being understanding, you're trying to serve the person that you're working with. We think about the role of a leader as a servant in some respects. There can be lots of great characteristics there. But the impact could be something quite different. The impact could be that people are left feeling unclear or uncertain about what the expectations are, or they may not be being held accountable for the work they're doing. They may not be being pushed to kind of challenge to do their work in a different way if their leader's trying to stay on side with them, perhaps. So I think just bringing the awareness around these different saboteurs, I think is super helpful for people and will help people be much more effective in their roles.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Mark. And I think there's so much to unpack here in terms of the impact on the business. So if you think about giving feedback and performance reviews, which I know is very deeply related to both of your businesses, the idea of having these saboteurs show up when you're having those conversations is very limiting in terms of meeting your potential or allowing your team to meet their potential. If you hold back when you're giving feedback to somebody because you don't want to hurt their feelings, you don't want them to feel criticized, or you don't know what's the right tone to say something difficult, then what do? You don't say it, and they don't know where they actually land. And when people are growing in their professional roles, they don't have the judgment to assess their own work. They need that feedback. And if you hold back and you don't give them that feedback, you are robbing them of the potential to grow. So if, a pleaser learns to look at this more objectively and they really have an intention to help their team. So let's say it's a manager and they really, really have a good intention to help their team, then they can change their own behavior and say, okay, when I give this feedback, I'm actually helping my team, not hurting their feelings, I'm helping them. And learning to use the right language, learning how to deliver it, that's a learning curve, but it actually is an achievable one once you set the right intention.
I think you made a really important point that I was hoping we would get to. Is that a lot of people who are in management or manager type roles have never been trained on how to manage people. In many cases, they've just been promoted because they've been around for a long time. And I see this because it gets to my desk when things go horribly wrong in most cases. But usually it's because that person has never provided the constructive criticism or the feedback or just called someone out when they are not doing what they should. And then people get more and more frustrated. The frustration builds until the point where they say, that's it, we just got to get rid of this person. And as you said, Sandra, you've kind of robbed yourself of the chance to coach this person and help them get better. And from a legal perspective, you've robbed the company of the chance to engage in proper progressive discipline and possibly dismissal on a more efficient way. But I guess what I was wondering, you talked about the business costs. So I am always talking to business leaders, business owners, HR professionals, and trying to convince them to engage in more proactive work. In my case, it's usually things like contracts and policies, but this type of thing is similar. And although a lot of organizations take me up on this, a lot of others say, well, we have other priorities, it's not in the budget. They don't see the immediate need because they don't see the immediate ROI. So how do you convince a business that this type of training is actually worth spending their money on?
Well, if you start the conversation with what are the things that are getting in the way of, getting to the scaling up or meeting your goals, what are the things, people will have their finger on the pulse that way. What are the things that are holding back your team today? And right away, you're going to get something. It may not be deep clarity about the root cause, but you will get something, right? Oh, I'm so frustrated that there are silos. Why aren't these two departments talking to each other? Or I'm so frustrated that these managers never get back to the clients in time. We're getting bad reviews on Google. They know some of the biggest issues, right? And what is that costing you? So if you allow those problems to continue, come on, do a spreadsheet. You know how much money that's costing you. Or if you have managers that are scared to fire people, because they don't want to, no, I'm not going to tell. No, they're fine. They're fine. Let them, so now you have a lot of mediocre performance along. Okay, it's growing and growing and growing, and you have a lot of mediocre performance. Now you don't have a budget to hire because you keep people forever in roles where they're not progressing. You're not doing anybody any favors. Are those people even happy in their roles? So, okay, so it's very easy to turn one of these problems into a spreadsheet and say, what is this costing my company? And if I start to shift one aspect of that, get rid of this problem, how much money is that going to save us?
It strikes me, Sandra, that I think I love the idea of a spreadsheet because, I know as HR professionals, we often get that challenge that you just raised, Stuart, around, where's the ROI? How are we going to justify the investment that we want to make in any area of development, but particularly something perhaps like this, which is around what's going on in the mind. It's not about developing a physical skill that you may see somebody being able to show some sort of proficiency in the work that they're doing. So it's a lot behind the scenes, which can make it difficult to see the impact. But if you are able to evaluate it in the way that you mentioned, then I think that's going to be super helpful. Because I'm envisaging, I love your example around performance management, but the awareness that you're looking to provide people should and will impact every interaction that the individual has with their team members. So that, I'm thinking about a meeting where you're brainstorming, or a meeting where you're trying to solve a problem. All of these interactions are going to be impacted by people having much greater awareness of their mindset and their impact on others. So I often find that there is this need for us to try and find an ROI, which I think, again, as HR leaders, if you can provide that, great. But I think you also have to challenge that a little bit as well. There's not a magic formula here. I think there has to be a level of appreciation and intuition that investing in these sorts of things is going to bring value to the organization.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think, Mark, I really appreciate your words on this because it's not so direct a line from doing a program like this to ROI. It's more of an imagination exercise where you appreciate that removing some of these obstacles or some of these pressure points is going to help facilitate growth, facilitate, pursuing your goals. But it's not a direct line. And what I do with the program is we start with a survey that asks about goals. So very specific goals that relate to the company and the individual's role. What are you trying to achieve over the course of this program? What would you like to shift? And then at the end, we do another survey. Okay, so what has shifted? So at least there's that measure point of some qualitative change.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I'm curious. Let's say you get past the first hurdle. So you convince the organization that this is something worthwhile for specific individuals. How do you deal with the individual who doesn't think there's a problem and is kind of antagonistic when you meet with them and try to start the process?
Well, coaches like to say that you can't coach somebody that's not willing to be coached. It's a dead end, right? And so really at the end of the day, they all have their own independent will about whether or not they want to be coached. On the other hand, I will say that a program like this isn't just for problems, it's for opportunities. So you could reframe it and completely, turn it on its head and say, this is a gift. So the people who are the best performers in our company are going to be doing a program like this because we see potential in you and we want you to go for it. So we are investing in you. Right? And
That's brilliant. That's a much better way to approach it with most people, I would think. So I am willing, and I'm going to backtrack a bit because I want to go back and this is mostly for my own benefit, but hopefully others will get benefit from it as well. So as I've said, like I clearly am a pleaser and I like it when people like me. One of the aspects of my practice is I'm doing a lot of mediation work these days where I'm trying to help parties resolve an ongoing legal dispute. And I love it when we get to a resolution and everyone is happy or at least content and they've resolved the issues. I love that stage, but almost every mediation involves what I call the hopeless stage, where everyone is convinced we're never going to settle, and usually everyone is angry, and everyone is angry that the other side is being so unreasonable. But of course, I'm the message conveyor, so I'm the one who's getting yelled at, and I got to admit, I don't like that because now no one is pleased, no one is happy. So uh, I don't know if you have any advice for me or others like me on how to deal with things like that.
Yeah, I love your honesty and the challenge of that aspect of your role. And maybe you speak for other mediators and how difficult that is to be the bearer of the bad news. Hopefully they'll benefit from us talking about this, at least just acknowledging it, I think is helpful. And one of the things that happens when we interact with each other, and this is the saboteurs, how they grow in strength. You just described the room being full of angry people. Well, even if you don't know what saboteurs are happening with the other people, you know they're angry, or you know that they're anxious, or you know they're fearful. You feel that energy. And the thing is that we have mirror neurons in our minds. So if you're in the room with somebody who's feeling very strong negative feelings, you are going to very quickly catch them like a flu, like a cold. You're going to catch it from them unless you are proactive. So it's very interesting the way you're describing this because it's structured. So you know when you're going into that room, you know what to expect. So you actually could take a step before you go in. And what you could do is charge up your sage. And the sage, we all have, the saboteurs, but we also all have the sage side of our mind, which is where we find our inner wisdom, where we feel calm, we feel peaceful, we feel creative. And we all have that, and we all are able to nurture that side of ourselves in our own way. So whatever it is you need to do, sit quietly, take a few breaths, just listen to some music, whatever it is that helps you to come into that more strongly before you go into the room, you'll be more able to protect yourself from the negativity of the room. And what we talked about earlier, the pleaser, it helps to set an intention. What is your role that day? Why are you doing this work? Why do you love this work? How are you helping this client? How do you care for them? How is your role in being the bringer of the bad news helping them to navigate their conflicts? What are you going to do to help them? Staying in that mode of, I know why I'm here. I know why I'm helping. It's going to help you to rise above those people pleasing negative feelings and lean more into the empathy, lean more into the connectivity, and feel good about your role.
Stuart, I wonder. I mean, I'm also a pleaser. It sounds like we all are. This is a pleaser self-help podcast here. But I wonder whether there's actually, I love the way that Sandra points out the strengths that come from being a pleaser. So in that situation where you're mediating, I feel I can relate to that to a certain extent in an HR role where you're trying to bring people together and find common ground, etc. But I'm wondering whether you're going to be particularly sensitive to the energy that's going on in the room because you are a pleaser. You're going to have that level of empathy and that understanding. So it's going to be even more heightened for you. But I'm also wondering whether, what I find myself sometimes doing in that situation is using that strength, as Sandra says, to notice what you're seeing in other people. So I can see that you're very frustrated by that comment that was just made, and as a pleaser, you're likely being able to, one, you'll notice that, but position that in a very different way than you would if you were a stickler perhaps, or an avoider for sure. So there's some real strength in those mindsets that I think we have to use to help us as well, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I appreciate that. You mentioned avoider. I guess I'm curious about that because to me, well, I'm obviously oversimplifying this because I don't have the knowledge that you do, Sandra. To me, part of the problem with being a pleaser is you sometimes avoid the difficult situations or the difficult conversations. So, what is the difference between a pleaser and an avoider?
Yeah, there's overlap. And I just want to say for the listeners where, it can be sometimes confusing to think about, oh, but I'm not sure I understand exactly what these saboteurs are. The truth is just, I will answer your question, Stuart. I just want to say as a simplistic way of looking at all of this, if you're feeling fearful, angry, guilty, any of those feelings, you're sabotaged. Okay, don't even worry about the label. You're in self-sabotage mode. You need to get out of it. So do whatever you can to bring yourself back to a state of calm, to a state of excitement, happy, whatever it is that you do to nurture yourself. And if you're seeing those feelings in other people, they are sabotaged. Do whatever you can to not make it worse, to not join them in that and interrupt it. So, okay, so looking at the difference between the avoider and the pleaser, the avoider, the avoider wants to avoid anything unpleasant. So it's not that they need your approval. And by the way, you could be both an avoider and a pleaser. And the way these
Right.
nine work is you are more than one. So that makes it even more confusing. But we're looking at one at a time. So the avoider they just want everything to be pleasant. And anything that's unpleasant, so the procrastinator, that's the avoider. Oh, okay, well no, I don't really enjoy doing that thing. Mm-mm. No, I'm just happy here, and it's as if that other thing doesn't exist. Okay.
Right. Isn't that everyone?
We all have a little bit of all of them, right? And
Yeah.
in certain situations, we will notice one show up more than the other. Yeah.
Fair enough. So I am mindful of time because the time always flies by. I know we talked about doing a bit of a role play, Sandra. I don't know if you think it'd be worth doing one now, or if you just want to offer some final thoughts.
Yeah, okay, I'll offer some thoughts. So if you find yourself, some managers out there, if you find yourself in a situation where you're going to get irritated, you're going into a meeting with your team and you're going to get irritated. This person's going to try and help me with something they don't need to help me with, and they're not doing their job, and they're not focusing on the thing I want them to focus on. And before you even get to the meeting, you're already annoyed. You're already irritated. Okay, so if that's relatable at all, what I would suggest is think about how to reframe how you see the meeting and the person before you go into it. Do everything that you can to sort of go in a calm way. And when that situation happens that you expected that would happen, that irritates and triggers you, react differently. Choose a different response. Okay, so if somebody's in the room telling you, oh, I have too much work to do because I'm doing all this other stuff for this other person who didn't do their work, and you're angry because this person is not supposed to be doing those other things and they're not doing the priorities you assigned to them, you know that's going to happen. Go in with an intention to help them to create boundaries. So instead
Okay.
of getting angry that they're not meeting your priorities, see it as your job to help them to create boundaries. Because if that person is struggling with people pleasing, they're actually not good at creating boundaries and they need the help. They don't know how to say no.
Okay, that's helpful. And I know I said that was final comment, but I'm now going to ask you one more question before I give you a chance, Mark. So let's say you're hypothetically a law firm owner and you have a group of associates, and let's say one associate is just consistently not billing the hours they are expected to, they're not generating the revenue they're expected to. So you're going to go into a meeting as the law firm owner, and we take your advice and we try to sort of reframe our view of the situation and the person, try to go in calmly. But how do you avoid kind of ending up in the situation you expect, where they're going to say, oh, well, I just don't have time or something like that? So if they give you the response that you expect, how do you avoid then just proceeding as you initially your gut reaction to say, well, you should have done this and this and this? How do you make it proactive or I guess more productive? Or if you understand my question.
Well, we started this talking about what mindset is. So mindset can be very fixed or it can be malleable. And if you go into this meeting with the malleable mindset, well, then you would be more taking the coach approach, and that would be asking questions. So rather than assuming that you actually know what's going on, go in as a partner in solving the problem. Give respect to the person that you're speaking to, as opposed to assuming the worst. Give them the respect that they're trying their best, or maybe they really are stuck. They don't know how to solve this, and they believe what they're telling you. And ask a lot of questions. So what is really going on? Where do you spend your time? Have you ever done a time exercise where you study your how you spend your time? Would you be interested in doing something like that? Where do you struggle? Is there something that's taking up your time that you wish weren't and you didn't think was adding value? You can just keep going with this and help them.
That's great advice. And the idea of asking lots of questions, I think, is really, really helpful as opposed to just judging and then blaming. Um, all right, that was really helpful. Mark, any final comments, thoughts?
Yeah, and I found it really interesting. It's I think maybe a couple of thoughts from my side. I think one would be just in a world that we're living in and working in with so much disruption and change. I think the one of the few things that we can control is our mindset. So I think just having that awareness to be able to control how we're responding to different things, how we're reacting to different situations, I think will increasingly become, probably always has been, but a skill that's much needed and something of a superpower for us, I think, in some respects. And then, the other point, which is maybe related, I just think is if I ever think about the work that we do with our leaders from a development perspective, I think it has to start with building self-awareness. I think until people really have a good sense of their values, their belief system, their mindset, then it's very difficult to be confident that some of the interventions you're making from a development perspective are going to have the desired impact. So I think this is a kind of really important starting point and a great reminder of just how important it is.
Awesome. Thank you. Sandra, before we finish, what's the best way for people to find you?
Thank you for that, Stuart. My website is bekhor.ca, Bekhor, and my email is my full name, Sandra Bekhor at bekhor.ca.
Awesome. And Mark?
People can get in touch on LinkedIn. People feel free to follow on the foHRward side. So as you mentioned, it's a community for HR leaders and anybody who is interested in the world of HR and the future of work. So please do look at our website, which is foHRward.com, as you mentioned, future, and then foHRward.com. And we'd be pleased to connect with you there.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again for agreeing to be guests on foHRward.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, I'll now take my turn to foHRward. So this is building off the discussion that we had in episode 85 of foHRward. And this is a frequent occurrence in my world where we get a call from an employer client who says something along the lines of, we have this employee, they've been a disaster since day one or for the last few years, bad attitude, poor performance. We've talked to them over and over again. It's not improving. We've had it. We want to dismiss them. We want to dismiss them for cause. So the next thing I will do is say, okay, great, send me the file. And I'll get the file, and it's usually about this thin. And when I look through it, really what I see is, every annual review for as many years as the person has been there. And each review says something like meets expectations. And there's really nothing else in there. And certainly no concerns raised and no discipline or warnings whatsoever. So bottom line is there may have been legitimate concerns, but no one ever really discussed them in any meaningful way. And when you ask why not, the reason is because most, or I shouldn't say most, many managers have never really been trained on how to manage and how to have difficult conversations, how to provide constructive criticism, how to engage in progressive discipline. And so they often just avoid it. And as we talked about in episode 85, you've got avoiders, you've got pleasers, you've basically got people who don't want to have difficult or awkward conversations, especially when, and many times, these are people who were previously in the group they're now managing. So the people they're managing are really more like friends. So they don't want to be the heavy. And I'll give one example from my practices going back about 15 years ago now. But I got that call. In that case, it was about an employee who was just consistently coming in late, and they were just sick and tired of it. They'd talked to him many times. He wasn't getting any better. So they were going to fire him. I got the file. There was nothing in the file. So I explained there was no way to dismiss for cause because there had been no progressive discipline. They decided just to go ahead and dismiss without cause, which meant they were going to have to pay some severance. So when they finally had the termination meeting and the employee asked why, because he thought everything was good, and they did what they shouldn't have done, which is they gave a reason. You shouldn't really give a reason when it's without cause dismissal, but that's a different issue. They explained that he was just consistently coming in late and they couldn't tolerate it anymore. And the employee, by all accounts, was shocked and basically said, I had no idea this was an issue. I didn't really realize it was a concern. If I knew, then I would have made the effort to get there on time every day. And when we dug a bit later after the fact, we found out that basically when the manager told us that he had talked to the employee and warned him many times, basically what he'd done is he didn't schedule a formal meeting. He didn't do anything other than try to catch the guy around the coffee machine and say, oh, I noticed you came in late again today. It'd be really great if you could come on time. And that was it. No indication that this was a concern, and certainly no indication that this employee's job was in danger. So there was no progressive discipline. And as I said, likely the situation would have been resolved if there had been. So this is not uncommon at all. And what happens is the frustrations build and build until they reach the breaking point where the manager goes to HR and says, you got to fire this guy. So they missed the chance to fix the situation. They probably lost a very good employee, and it costs some money in terms of severance and, of course, legal fees. So the bottom line is that, for a manager or anyone who is overseeing others, they've got to step up. They've got to have the difficult conversations, including the clear warnings and progressive discipline. Otherwise, there's bad HR consequences. You're certainly not going to be an employer of choice if this is how you manage your staff. And there's also going to be significant cost, legal, severance, and otherwise. And so managers and those who are managing others should certainly could certainly benefit from the type of coaching we talked about in episode 85 with Sandra Bekhor and Mark Edgar. And I encourage people to look at that type of thing and encourage business owners and HR leaders to ensure that their managers are trained on that type of thing, among other things. But being aware of that type of thing is critical if you're going to have a proper manager. So that's all for my rant for this month. And that's a wrap for episode 85 of Fire Away. Catch new episodes on the third Tuesday of each month, which is anywhere that you can find your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. Thank you very much to Sandra Bekhor and Mark Edgar for being guests on the show. And thank you to Rebecca and Mark for all their work behind the scenes. And to quote one of my favorite hockey broadcasters, the pleasure has been all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.